Those of you who dare face their dreams, Venture Consultants offers something beyond the power of words to describe. And why don't we describe it in the brochure? Because it's mostly just pain.
Yes. Ain't that the truth?
Put it simply, guys, human beings simply aren't built to function at the cruising altitude of a 747. Okay, once we get above here, above the South Col, our bodies will be literally dying, and I mean literally dying. It's not called the death zone for nothing, guys. So the game is, can we get you up to the top and down to the bottom before that happens?
And that was a moment from Everest. I'm delighted to say that Jason Clarke is with us in the studio. Jason, how are you, sir?
And I'm delighted to be here. Thank you very much.
Well, thanks very much, Steve, for coming in. It's nice to hear you speaking in your actual voice, because I hear you in so many. Your accents are so fantastic.
Thank you.
And now we've got the real Jason.
The real Australian.
Well, you were just doing some BBC kind of.
This is the BBC.
There you go. That's sort of very good.
This is the BBC.
Slightly disconcerting. Well, it's a pleasure to have you on. Now, before we talk Everest, we ought to sort of couch this conversation in, because people don't like spoilers. They like to go and see a movie and have the story told.
Yes.
And quite a few years ago, I got into trouble I interviewed George Clooney for Perfect Storm.
Ah.
And we did the whole interview because I was thinking it was a first of all, the event was famous.
Yes.
Then the book became very famous.
Sebastian, yeah.
And I was thinking, so let's talk about it, assuming that everybody knows
about
what happened.
And they didn't.
and they didn't. So I have to say, if you really, really don't want to know anything about Everest, then you'll probably need to go somewhere else for 15 minutes. But we will couch this conversation as cleverly as we can.
Yes, absolutely.
So
it's hard not to. This is a real event. This is a well-written and publicised and chewed over and thought about and talked about event. You know, along with the Mallory story, it's the most famous event on the mountain.
Yes.
Oh, actually, no, Mallory and Tenzing and the initial summit.
So we'll tiptoe around it, but obviously aspects of the story are
we won't be shy either.
Going to be told as we go through this. So just give us the bare bones of this story, then, Jason, as to
the bare bones. 1996. Early May, two teams, going for the summit together. There are actually a lot of teams of South Africans. It's previous to 1992. To go to Everest and climb Everest, you had to be a part of a national, group that was climbing. In 1992, Rob Hall and another American called Pete Athens, who had a separate company, started taking groups up privately, where you could be a private citizen, pay X amount of dollars and go to the top. David Brashears was actually the first. He took one client, Dick Bass, up in 1985, but that was the only one. So 96, Rob had been doing it for 3 years. Scott Fisher's group come along. A whole bunch of people came along at that point to try and, and do the same thing. You got great climbers like Scott and Rob that wanted to do what they love, climb mountains, make a living from it, and share in their experience. Rob had pioneered a method of getting to the top, of acclimatization, of the amount of time of getting there and up and down, ascending and then coming down for a little bit and then going down to the bottom and then going for the top. And that is where we start. It's a competitive year. Outside Magazine has sent John Krakauer to...
And who's he?
John Krakauer was a writer for Outside Magazine. This is previous to all of his, his novels and his explosion of, his popularity and him becoming John Krakauer, a novelist I love, actually. I've read all of his books. So he's there as a journalist to write about it. He's also a very experienced climber, not at altitude, but, a very technical climber, and climbed some big peaks in Alaska and all over the world. And that's the setting. Normally last year his wife was there, Jan Arnold, in New Zealand. This year she's pregnant, so she's at home.
As played by Keira Knightley.
Which is Keira Knightley, yes. Played by Keira Knightley. And that's the premise of when we set off. That's where it starts. So you're a journalist, more competition. John's writing an article on the commercialization of Everest. And it's important to remember when you do watch this that this is 1995. Now we know that instead of 10 teams, there's 1,000 people at base camp this year or last year or the year before. So it was before commercialization of a lot of our natural resources, and that really kicked off.
So Rob Hall, your character, is taking another group of adventurers and climbers and clients.
And they were accomplished climbers too. This wasn't, these people had climbed a lot of serious peaks. Yasuko Number had climbed 6 out of the 7. This was to be her 7th summit. of all the, you know, the 7 summits are the highest points on each continent.
It is obviously the reason why this particular story is being told is because it doesn't end happily. There's a tragedy waiting to unfold.
Yes.
What is it that goes wrong in this particular expedition?
Yes, that has been the question of a lot of books and articles and talk shows. It is and was a very controversial year. When you know the story of it, it can be like a detective novel. It can be like an Agatha Christie, you know, on the Orient Express. Mm-hmm. You want to connect all these dots. There are so many small things, that added up to a man being at the top of Everest at 28,000 feet, you know, on a satellite phone to his wife who's pregnant in New Zealand saying, "I'm not coming home, my love. You know, please sleep well and, you know, and send my love to our baby." And a man that you never would have expected to die. You know, Rob Hall was probably one of the most safest, you know, cross his T's, dot his I's climbers who'd been to the summit more than any Western person at that time. And all these books go into that, different times, different versions of events. You know, when you get up to a certain point in altitude, things get a little hazy, as, you know, David Brashears or even Rob said. So they were late. You know, they were late getting up there. You could say there was pressure from having a journalist there. There was pressure of competition. But essentially, you know, ropes weren't fixed when they should have been fixed because one, you know, Lop saying one Sherpa was down below with another client. They were supposed to be sharing events. Rob overstayed his official turnaround time, but even that can be moved depending on the weather and depending on what you think. And then Rob decided to take Doug to the top, possibly when he could have turned him around. But then, you know, my own opinion is Doug, you know, Rob's not irresponsible in that regard. What I don't understand is, you know, is then, you know, Doug collapsed at the top of the Hillary step without oxygen. So that was, you know, why he hadn't seen that. And then a storm came in and then Doug, you know, needed to be carried down by Rob. Radios weren't working properly. There was confusion about whether there was oxygen at the South Summit where they stash it. Rob dragged Doug down and literally threw him down the Hillary step, which is the most technical, complicated part of the mountain, in a massive 120-kilometre-an-hour storm, and found himself exhausted and then couldn't get himself down.
When you're telling a real story with real people who have real relatives,
yes,
who are still with us, you have a particular responsibility, don't you? The whole team, the whole crew.
Yes, you do.
To make sure that this is, you know, inch by inch, moment by moment, that this is a true telling of the story.
Yes, particularly when people died and people that were clients of adventure consultants, of Rob and Jan, you know, they died. And particularly when Rob has a young daughter, Sarah, who's 19 now, you know, and he never met her. I think there's a responsibility anytime you do tell somebody's story full stop. I think it's very easy to pick up something and, you know, commercialize it like, you know, I'm sure they were writing about, and use it for your own benefit. But these are people's lives. These people have legacies. These people have memories. And before you commit something to celluloid, you should try and cross your T's and dot your I's. And the most remarkable thing I think about this movie, you know, apart from the 3D and, you know, the immensity of the mountain, is that Balthazar and Tim Bevan spent a lot of time getting to know Jan
that's the director
and the New
you're talking
Zealanders.
about, yeah.
Yeah, Balthazar's the director and Tim Bevan's the producer. You know, and then distilled this story into not a detective story or a whodunit or a blame or what happened, because that's there in the books, and people have never gotten to the bottom. People are dead. You can't know anymore. And really gone for what remains, what really, you know, what was there in the beginning. You know, one man died with a child. Why is he there? How could, you know, why would you climb when you have a baby? You know, and then, you know, and it's one thing to get to the top, but it's nothing to make it home. And another man like Beck Weathers, who should have died twice, and, you know, did not have the experience to live, you know, in that way, or be up in that mountain that high, but then has that will and that desire and makes it home twice when he's left for dead to live and survive.
And people will we sort of occasionally maybe we need telling, but in recent months we know how dangerous Everest is.
Yeah.
And there was the earthquake last year, and there was the Nepalese, there was an avalanche last year.
There's a randomness in the mountains as well.
Yeah,
you know, when you talk to David Brashears or your Guy Cotters, who Sam Worthington plays in the film, that even Joe Simpson in his book about the Eiger, there's a randomness that event. No matter how experienced you are, no matter whatever, something can happen. You know, a rock can fall, or you can get sick. An earthquake can come along and flatten the entire country.
And when you're filming, I think, did you get to 16,000 feet? How
we got to 16,000.
How difficult was that?
It's It's very difficult because you're shooting up there as a camera crew, so it's not as if you're moving and you're walking up and acclimatizing, over the 2-week period you would. We would chopper up, 2,000-3,000 feet at a time and land and shoot. So it was very difficult. But that day, because I was the last chopper out, and I got on the helicopter with Siddhartha, who is the main rescue pilot in Nepal, and in that earthquake, he would have flown many, many missions. And Siddhartha and I knew where we were in proportion to Everest, and I said, "Come on, man, take me up Everest." It was a crystal clear day. And he looked at me and he got permission over the radio, and then we chop it around the corner, up the valley, cross over the icefall, and you see the immensity of this icefall. And then across up to Camp 1, down around the corner, Camp 2, and we hovered at 23,000 feet. You put my head out the window and you see the crystal clear snow, and then you see the summit up there, this big black, and it looks so close that you could almost say, "Dude, put a rope out, leave me here for a couple of, come back."
Yeah. There are a couple of things that you've already referred to a whole bunch of things, which people, I mean, it's an amazing movie, and I think the 3D is, which is much discussed on this program, but I thought was really worth it in this movie. It was really part of the immersion in the kind of storm and the ice and everything else which is coming your way. And you get that kind of depth of field, which maybe you don't need in most movies. But
it's not there to shock you. It's not there to make you go, "Hey, It's there to add to the experience.
There isn't a cheap kind of, here comes a boulder, and you think...
Well, you had to, I mean, to make this movie and to have some kind of understanding of these people and who they are and why they do these things and what it is they get out of it, you need to experience the mountain in some way. And that was, I think, the best way to do it. First of all, when you see that mountain, and there's that scene we come out on the South Col, come out, boys, and take a look. There it is, and it's quiet. And then you just see this summit, this big... It's impressive. It's impressive when you go to the Himalayas and you see Everest for the first time. It draws you. It's a magnet.
Did you do some night climbing on Ben Nevis, I think?
Yeah, I did. I did. Yeah. Remember a couple of years ago, there was that massive big storm over Christmas. It was a huge big storm. And I always thought that, you know what, I'm probably going to shoot that part in a studio because you have to, you want to get in there tight and you can't put a crew at 28,000 feet, 29,000 feet. So Marty Henderson and I, who plays Andy Harris, who is the guy that comes back up to rescue me in the storm, we went up Ben Nevis for a night climb in that storm with a guide. And, we were rappelling down the North. I mean, it was one of the, just to experience being exposed high and in, deep in snow and ice in some really bad weather during the night. It's not much fun. It really is scary. It hurts. And Ben Nevis is a great mountain to do that.
This movie also contains the first time I have ever seen people dancing to Crowded House. It was a shocking moment.
It was great, though.
No one has ever danced to Weather With...
Because I went and spent a lot of time with Jan, with Jan Arnold, Rob's wife. Yeah. And, it was a big thing for her to revisit this and because it was 19 years ago, and also to introduce it to her daughter, Rob's daughter as well. Sarah never met Rob. And after a while, and a lot of bonding, and we hiked and, and talked and that, and then we'd Skype when I had to go back to America. She, said one of the things Rob used to do was sing songs from other tunes, and one of the main one was, I always take the weather with you, but he'd change it to always take my wife bear. I always take my wife bear wherever you go. You always take your wife bear with you, because that was the one year she wasn't there because she was pregnant. Yeah, so it was just like I used to sing that and play it all the time, and then Bolt, who's Icelandic, had never heard Crowded House, and he said that's a great song. And it's very New Zealand.
It is. It's very, and everyone's dancing.
Yeah,
and it is a great moment. Jason Clarke, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, man.